Hello and welcome to today's story. My name is Philip, and I like to dive deep into scary Asian stories and cover them in my videos. If you have an interesting story you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I always read all comments. For now, let's get into today's story, where we have a few terrifying tales to share. One of them takes us beneath the bright lights of Seoul, into a world most people never see the underground tunnels of the city's subway system. It's fast, clean, and safe, or at least that's what everyone believes. But as every Seoul local knows, there's one train you should never take, the last train to Sinchon. It runs after midnight, when the platforms grow quiet and the city above begins to sleep. That's when strange things are said to happen. Commuters whisper about passengers who never reach their destination, about train cars that go dark between stations, and about reflections that move even when you don't. Tonight's story follows a young university student who learned too late that some rides don't end where they should. This is the story of the last train to Sinchon. It was a rainy Thursday night in Seoul. The kind of rain that doesn't fall in drops, but sheets thick, silver curtains that blur the city lights and soak through umbrellas in seconds. Ji-hoon, a 22-year-old university student, pressed her backpack against her chest as she hurried through the near-empty campus. She'd stayed late in the library, cramming for an exam she didn't feel ready for. The fluorescent lights had flickered once, twice, before she finally packed her notes and decided to call it a night. By the time she reached the station entrance, it was nearly midnight. The streets above were slick with rain, and the sound of tires on wet asphalt echoed through the narrow alleys. The Sinchon line entrance gaped before her, a cold tunnel of light and shadow that seemed to breathe. Most people avoided the subway this late. The last train came around 12:15, and after that, the platforms went silent. But Ji-hoon didn't have much of a choice. The buses had already stopped running, and she lived too far to walk. She tapped her card at the gate, the electronic chime unusually loud against the emptiness. Down the escalator, the air changed cooler, heavier. The platform stretched out, echoing with the distant hum of electricity. A lone vending machine glowed near the wall, its reflection dancing on the wet floor tiles. No one else was there, not even the usual janitor who nodded at her most nights. As the clock struck 12:14, the last train screeched into the station. Its arrival broke the silence like a scream. Ji-hoon stepped closer, watching the headlights flare against the tunnel walls. When the doors opened, a faint gust of stale air brushed against her face. Inside, the car was almost empty. Only two people sat apart. A man slumped at the far end, his chin tucked into his chest, and a woman sitting near the doors, her long black hair hiding her face. Ji-hoon hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The doors slid shut behind her with a dull thud, sealing her in. As the train started moving, she sank into a seat and stared at her reflection in the window. Her face looked pale under the flickering lights. The city outside blurred into streaks of neon and rain. Somewhere in the distance, the intercom crackled a faint static, then silence. The rhythmic sound of the train wheels against the tracks filled the car, calm, predictable, almost hypnotic, until the lights dimmed just slightly, and Ji-hoon thought she saw the reflection of the sleeping man's eyes, open. The train rocked gently as it sped through the tunnels, humming like a mechanical lullaby. Ji-hoon tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had crept up her spine since she boarded. She blamed it on exhaustion, too many nights spent studying, too much caffeine, too little sleep. Still, something about this ride felt wrong. The car was too quiet. Even the usual hum of conversation or the occasional ringtone was missing. At the far end, The man she thought was asleep hadn't moved at all. His chin was still lowered, his hands resting perfectly still on his knees. He didn't sway with the motion of the train like most sleeping passengers did. He was unnaturally still, almost as if he wasn't breathing. The woman near the doors sat facing straight ahead, her long hair concealing her face completely. She hadn't shifted once since Ji-hoon entered. No phone, no bag. Not even a blink visible through the curtain of hair. Just a stiff, statue-like stillness. When the train slowed for the next station, Ji-hoon let out a small breath of relief. But as the doors opened, no one got off. No one got on. The platform outside was empty, not just quiet, but lifeless. The digital clock above the doors flickered for a second, before resetting to 12:14 again. She frowned. That was impossible. The train had been moving for several minutes already. She looked up toward the intercom speaker as it crackled to life, producing a distorted announcement. The voice was male, robotic, but the words were slurred, garbled Korean that dissolved into static halfway through. Then, a long, drawn-out sound filled the car like a deep exhale, or someone breathing too close to the microphone. Ji-hoon's hands tightened around her backpack. She turned toward the sleeping man again, still motionless, still facing down. But in the reflection of the window opposite her, she swore she saw his head turn slightly just enough for his face to face her direction. She blinked. The real man hadn't moved. His body was frozen in the same position. Yet, in the reflection, those eyes were open, watching. Her stomach twisted. She rubbed her eyes, telling herself it was a trick of the light, maybe a double reflection from the fluorescent bulbs. But when she glanced again, the reflection's mouth was now slightly open, as if whispering something she couldn't hear. The train lurched suddenly, jerking her forward. The lights flickered, plunging the car into momentary darkness. In that instant, she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of footsteps slow, deliberate, pacing toward her. When the lights came back on, both passengers were exactly as before. Her pulse quickened. She tried to steady her breathing, glancing at the emergency map above the doors. Only 3 stops until Sinchon. She could handle that. She just needed to stay calm. But as the train rolled into the next station, her relief turned into confusion. The platform name was unreadable. The digital sign above it glitched, showing flickering symbols instead of letters. This time, as the doors opened, cold air swept in. She waited for someone to step on. No one did. The doors closed again with a heavy metallic hiss. She looked at her phone, no signal. No Wi-Fi. No time displayed, just a blank white screen. A nervous laugh slipped out before she could stop it. This had to be some kind of electrical problem. Maybe the system was down. Maybe that's why the announcements were garbled. But then, from the far end of the car, came a sound that froze her mid-thought, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming lightly against metal. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the man, or at least from somewhere near him. Ji-hoon swallowed hard and stared at the reflection again. The man's head was still down, but his reflection was smiling. Ji-hoon couldn't look away from that reflection. The faint curve of a smile that didn't exist on the real man's face. It wasn't wide or cartoonish, just a small, unnatural curl of the lips, as if the reflection knew something she didn't. She blinked, and it was gone. Both versions of him were motionless again. The rhythmic tapping had stopped too, replaced by the soft, constant hum of the train. The woman near the doors hadn't moved. Her long hair swayed slightly with the motion of the carriage, but her hands remained perfectly still on her lap. Ji-hoon wanted to change cars to move closer to the front, to find someone, anyone, but fear glued her to her seat. At the next stop, the lights dimmed again, then flickered rapidly. The car jolted, throwing sparks of white light across the windows. When the doors opened, there was no platform this time, just darkness beyond the frame, like the tunnel itself had swallowed everything outside. The intercom crackled again, that same distorted voice whispering something almost intelligible this time. A single word broke through the static. Don't. Then silence. Hae-jin's pulse hammered in her ears. She looked around, her reflection stuttering across the glass as the lights flickered again. The woman at the door was now facing her. She hadn't seen her move. Her head was still lowered, but her face hidden by that curtain of hair was now aimed directly in Hae-jin's direction. She rose slowly from her seat, gripping the metal pole to steady herself. Her voice came out small, trembling. "Are you okay?" No response. The train jerked again, harder this time. The lights went out for several seconds, plunging the carriage into blackness. In the dark, Hae-jin heard movement, quick, shuffling footsteps. The sound of something brushing against the seats. And then, breathing. Not hers. Close, almost in her ear. The lights snapped back on. Both passengers were in their original positions. Hae-jin's heart was pounding so hard it made her vision blur. She backed toward the door connecting to the next car, pressing the button repeatedly. It didn't open. The lock clicked uselessly. That's when she saw it, the emergency intercom panel by the door. Desperate, she pressed it. Static filled the speaker, followed by another voice, this one clearer, urgent, a man's voice. "Don't look at them! It!" hissed. "Whatever you do, don't look directly." Her breath caught in her throat. "Who are you? What's happening?" The line went dead. The next moment, the reflection in the glass shifted again. The sleeping man's head was now fully upright in the window, though his body hadn't moved at all. Behind him, reflected faintly, stood another figure, a pale blur, almost human, hanging upside down near the ceiling. The air inside the carriage grew heavy, suffocating. The train sped up, the lights strobing faster now, the sound of the tracks growing louder and louder. Hae-jin's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She fumbled it out with shaking hands. On the screen was a single notification she didn't recognize. An old Seoul Metro alert, time-stamped from 2004. Service disruption. Last train to Sinchon temporarily suspended due to fatal accident on the line. The date flickered once, then vanished. The train was speeding far too fast now. The sound of the wheels against the tracks roared like thunder through the tunnel, shaking the carriage. Hae-jin stumbled, clutching the pole to keep her balance. Every light in the car was flickering violently, bathing the space in pulses of white and shadow. Between those flashes, shapes seemed to appear and vanish. Silhouettes standing in the aisles, faces pressed against the windows, pale hands gripping the overhead handles. Her reflection multiplied, twisting in the glass. There were 3-4 versions of her now, each slightly out of sync. Some blinked when she didn't. Others stared straight ahead, mouths open as if screaming silently. The intercom buzzed again, this time so loud it made her ears ring. That same garbled voice spoke only now. There were 2 of them, overlapping, whispering the same distorted warning. "Don't! Look!" Then, from the far end of the car, came a long scraping sound. The man who had been slumped over was standing, not rising normally, his body lifted, stiff and jerky, as though pulled up by invisible strings. His neck cracked audibly as his head tilted back, revealing eyes that were too wide, too still. Hae-jin froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The man's mouth opened slowly, unnaturally wide, and a low growl echoed from deep within him, mechanical, hollow, like metal grinding against metal. She turned to the woman near the door, hoping for help, but the woman was gone. In her place, a trail of black water seeped across the floor, trickling toward Hae-jin's shoes. The lights above her fizzed, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed everything. She could hear the footsteps again, now multiplied, several pairs circling her, wet, dragging sounds. A whisper brushed her ear, her own name. Hae-jin. The voice was unmistakably her own. Her phone flashlight came on by itself, flickering weakly. She aimed it forward and froze. The sleeping man was gone from his seat. Instead, there were dozens of people now seated in the car. Every seat filled with shadowy figures. Their faces were pale, their eyes unfocused, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Some were missing parts of their faces entirely, like their reflections had been half erased. The phone slipped from her trembling hand, clattering onto the wet floor. When she bent to grab it, she saw something beneath the seat's hands. Dozens of them, pale and twitching, pressing upward from the floor as though trying to claw their way out. A deafening metallic shriek filled the car. The doors at the end suddenly burst open, revealing the next carriage, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with black water, rippling silently, as if the tunnel itself had flooded. For a moment, she saw her reflection on its surface, standing behind her, smiling faintly. Then the lights exploded in a blinding flash. When her vision cleared, the train had stopped moving. The passengers were gone. The seats were empty. Only the dripping sound of water echoed through the silent carriage. The station outside was unfamiliar. No signs, no lights, just an endless stretch of darkness. Her reflection in the window, however, was still there. But it wasn't copying her anymore. It was waving. Hae-jin stood frozen, her breath visible in the cold air. The train doors were wide open now, but what lay beyond wasn't a platform. It was an empty void, just black, stretching forever, with faint echoes that almost sounded like distant voices calling from below. Her reflection still waved from the glass, but when she turned to look directly at the window, it changed. It wasn't mimicking her anymore. It was showing the carriage as it had been before. The sleeping man, the woman by the door, even Hae-jin herself, sitting calmly as though nothing had happened. Her heart pounded. She stumbled closer to the glass, pressing her palm against it. The other Hae-jin in the reflection turned her head slowly and smiled, as if reassuring her. Then, from behind that reflected version, something appeared in outline of another passenger, leaning forward, whispering into the reflection's ear. The intercom hissed again. A different voice this time, steady, human, but faint. "If you can hear this," it said, "you're on the Sinchon line. Do not exit until you see people. If you step out before that, you'll stay there." Hae-jin's mind reeled. Stay there? What did that mean? She glanced at her phone. It was on again, but the time hadn't moved. Still 12:14. The battery indicator was stuck at 100%. Everything was frozen, except for her. Then the train lurched forward suddenly, though she hadn't felt it start again. Outside the window, she saw flashes of stations, but none of them were familiar. The names were written in an older form of Hangul, symbols no longer used in modern Seoul. She was still staring when the intercom crackled one last time. The voice spoke in a near whisper. "This train doesn't run anymore. Not since the accident." Her stomach dropped. Accident? She remembered that strange notification on her phone, the alert from 2004. The service suspension. The fatal incident. Pieces began to fall into place in her mind. The silent passengers. The flickering time. The reflection that wasn't hers. The voice telling her not to look. The Sinchon line had never truly closed. It had kept running, just not for the living, and Ji-hoon was still on board. The train began to slow again, the sound of the brakes screaming through the tunnel. The lights dimmed to a soft, reddish glow. Ahead, a station appeared. Sinchon. Familiar, but wrong. The letters on the sign flickered, half-faded, as if painted over with dust. This time, the platform wasn't empty. Dozens of people stood waiting. But they didn't move. They didn't breathe. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow and gray, staring straight at her as the doors slid open. For a long moment, Ji-hoon couldn't move. Then, without her deciding to, her legs carried her forward. The air outside was thick, heavy. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, one unread message, from an unknown number. It read, "Thank you for riding the Sinchon line." Then, below that, "Next departure, 12:14. The platform lights went out. The train doors closed behind her. And by morning, when the first real commuters arrived at Sinchon Station, they found a phone lying on the platform, the time frozen at 12:14. No one ever found the girl who owned it. The last train to Sinchon wasn't the only strange tale whispered through Seoul's underground. Beneath the city's glow, its subway lines hide stories that never make it to the news rumors of passengers who step off the map and never return. And while Sinchon has its cursed train, another place carries its own secret. Just a few stops away, deep beneath the neon chaos of Hongdae, there's an elevator that doesn't lead where it should. Locals say it only moves after midnight. That once the button flickers, it takes you somewhere the city forgot a basement that was never built. Our next story is about a man who pressed that button and found out where it really goes. Hongdae, after midnight, was a different world. The usual chaos of music, chatter, and flashing lights had faded into something quieter, heavier. The streets were slick from a recent drizzle, neon signs reflecting off puddles like fractured mirrors. Ji-hoon zipped up his black hoodie as he stepped out of the club, still feeling the bass vibrating faintly in his chest. He'd just finished his last DJ set of the week, a small gig at an underground bar tucked behind the main street. It hadn't paid much, but it kept him close to the nightlife he loved. Now, though, the streets were almost empty. A few drunk students laughed somewhere in the distance, their voices echoing through the narrow alleyways. A streetlight buzzed and flickered, throwing long, nervous shadows across the walls. Ji-hoon checked his phone. 12:53 a.m. He swore softly. The last train from Hongdae Station left at 12:45. He thought about catching a taxi, but his wallet was thin, and the rain had made fares surge. The station wasn't far, just a short walk down the slope and across the street. Maybe he could still catch something. A bus, a late shuttle, anything. He slipped his headphones around his neck and started walking, his sneakers squeaking against the wet pavement. When he reached the station entrance, it was almost completely deserted. The usually crowded ticket gates stood open and silent. The escalators were motionless, and a "service closed" sign hung loosely from one side. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet iron and electricity. Somewhere below, he heard the low hum of machinery still running. Ji-hoon hesitated. He knew the trains had stopped, but maybe the elevators were still active. At least he could get down to the lower platform level and figure out another way out. He pressed the button beside the glass elevator doors. A soft chime rang, and the doors opened immediately. Inside, the lights buzzed weakly. The mirror along the back wall cracked in two places. He stepped in and pressed the button for one. The doors began to close, but just before they did, he noticed something strange. The panel had an extra button below the numbered floors, faint, half-lit, marked B4. He frowned. He'd been through this station countless times. There was no basement level that deep. Before he could think, the elevator jerked slightly and began descending on its own. The digital floor indicator flickered from 1 to B1, then B2, and kept going. By the time it reached B4, the air had grown colder. The lights dimmed to a dull yellow, and when the doors opened, Ji-hoon realized he wasn't anywhere he recognized. A narrow corridor stretched before him, lined with rusted vending machines and broken tiles. Somewhere down that hallway, a faint humming echoed soft, rhythmic, almost human. Ji-hoon stepped out cautiously, half expecting someone from maintenance to appear and tell him he wasn't supposed to be there. But the elevator doors closed immediately behind him, the metallic thud echoing unnaturally loud through the empty space. He turned, pressing the call button. Nothing happened. The small light above it didn't even blink. He pressed it again, harder this time. Still nothing. The elevator seemed dead. The air in this lower level was thick, damp, and cold enough to make his breath visible. The hum he'd heard before was clearer, now an off-key melody that rose and fell with the rhythm of the subway arrival chime. It sounded like someone humming softly through static, far down the corridor. Ji-hoon looked around. The tiled floor was cracked in long, jagged lines, and patches of mold crept up the walls. A row of old vending machines stood along the left, side the kind he hadn't seen in years, with faded stickers advertising long discontinued drinks. Some of their screens flickered weakly, others were completely dark. One of them emitted a steady beep every few seconds, like it was trying to complete a transaction that would never finish. "Hello?" Ji-hoon called out, his voice echoing far longer than it should have. No answer. He checked his phone, no signal, no Wi-Fi. The time had frozen at 1:04 a.m. He shoved it back into his pocket and walked a few steps forward. The humming grew louder. It was definitely a woman's voice, quivering slightly, repeating a few notes again and again. Something about it was almost familiar, like the automated jingle that played whenever a train arrived. The sound led him toward the far end of the hallway, where the lights flickered more violently. The last lamp on the ceiling buzzed, glowing a faint orange instead of white. Beneath it stood a row of cleaning carts, mops leaning against the wall, buckets half filled with dirty water. A single fluorescent vest hung from a nail, swaying gently as if someone had just brushed past it. Ji-hoon froze. There was someone standing at the end of the corridor. She wore a faded blue cleaning uniform, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. A disposable mask covered the lower half of her face, and her gray hair was tied back in a loose bun. Her shoulders moved slightly as she hummed, the same off-key melody looping endlessly. "Excuse me," Ji-hoon said, forcing a polite tone. "Is there a way back up? I think I came down by mistake." The woman didn't answer. She turned her head slowly, too slowly, and the humming stopped. The motion sensor light above her flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, leaving only the faint glow from the vending machines. Ji-hoon stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his throat. When the light came back on, she was gone. He took a step back toward the elevator, scanning the corridor. Empty, silent. Then he heard it again, not humming this time, but a soft, dragging sound, something scraping across the tiles. He turned. The woman was there again, halfway down the hallway now, dragging a mop behind her. The mop head left a dark, wet streak across the floor. Her mask was still in place, but her movements were wrong, too jerky, too mechanical, as if her limbs didn't quite know how to move naturally. Ji-hoon's mouth went dry. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he muttered, backing away. The elevator button finally lit up behind him. He spun and slammed it. The doors didn't open. The light flickered. From down the hall, the woman tilted her head to the side. The humming started again, louder this time, no longer gentle, sharp, and warped, like a broken speaker replaying a familiar tune. The arrival chime, the sound that meant a train was coming. Only there were no tracks here, and no train. Ji-hoon slammed the elevator button again, but the light sputtered and died. His reflection in the metal doors flickered like a glitching video, breaking into fragments before snapping back together. The humming from down the corridor had changed faster now, looping into the distorted subway melody. He turned back toward the woman. She was closer. Too close. Her shoes squeaked on the wet tiles, her mop dragging behind her with a wet slosh. The long fluorescent bulb above her buzzed violently, pulsing with each of her slow, uneven steps. Her eyes were hidden behind the shadows of her hair. "Hey, stop," Ji-hoon said, his voice trembling despite himself. "Just tell me where the exit is." The humming stopped. The woman tilted her head again, that same unnatural bird-like motion. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from the walls rather than her mouth, she whispered, "No exit after last train." Ji-hoon froze. "What?" Before he could say more, the vending machines behind him clicked on one by one. Their dim screens flickered to life, all showing the same image, a grainy CCTV feed of the hallway he was standing in. He turned to look at them, and his heart nearly stopped. In the footage, he wasn't alone. There were dozens of figures standing behind him, pale and motionless, crowding the corridor. He spun around. The hallway was empty. When he turned back, the vending machines all went dark again, except one. On its screen was a looping clip of an elevator door closing. In the split second before it shut, he saw someone standing inside. A reflection that looked exactly like him. The lights flickered again. When they came back, the woman was gone. The hallway was silent, except for the low hum of electricity. Ji-hoon slowly backed toward the elevator doors, every nerve in his body screaming at him to leave. Then a faint voice came from the speaker above the call button. "If you're still down there," it said, crackling through layers of static, "don't move. Don't let her see your face." Ji-hoon froze, eyes darting around the walls for a camera, a speaker, anything. "Who is this? What's going on?" The voice cut off with a burst of white noise. He looked over his shoulder. The cleaning cart at the end of the hallway was moving slowly, rolling toward him, though no one was pushing it. The mop handle scraped against the tiles, leaving behind a long, black streak. He backed up until his shoulders hit the elevator doors. His reflection in the metal looked wrong, his mouth slightly open, his chest not moving in sync with his breathing. Then the humming started again, now right behind him. He turned nothing, just the faint smell of bleach and stagnant water. When he looked at his reflection again, the masked woman was standing beside him in it, only in the reflection, and she was smiling. The humming rose into a shrill, vibrating pitch that made Ji-hoon's eardrums ache. He staggered back from the elevator doors, staring at his own reflection, his double, still standing there beside the masked woman. In the mirror, her head turned toward him with impossible speed. The mask shifted slightly, revealing just enough of her mouth to show something dark and rotted beneath. Ji-hoon spun around, and the corridor was empty again. The silence that followed was so deep it almost pulsed, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere behind the vending machines, came the sound of a ringtone, a faint, old melody, distorted by static. He hesitated, then stepped forward. The lights dimmed again, flickering in uneven bursts. Between those flashes, the hallway seemed to stretch longer, the walls bending subtly like a warped reflection in water. The ringing grew louder. He knelt beside one of the vending machines and saw an old flip phone wedged between the machine and the wall, screen still glowing. The caller ID was a single line of text. Control room B4. He picked it up, the plastic slick with condensation. Hello? For a moment, only static. Then a voice, faint, male, trembling. Don't! Let the doors close, it said. Who is this? Don't let them close, the voice repeated, sharper this time. Or you'll... The line went dead. The lights went out completely. Ji-hoon's breath hitched. He could hear something moving again. Not footsteps this time, but dragging. Slow, deliberate scraping, as if something heavy was being pulled along the tiles. A faint reflection glimmered on the dark glass of the vending machines, the woman's silhouette, walking toward him, mop in hand. He stumbled backward, the phone slipping from his grasp. It clattered to the floor, and when it did, the vending machine screens all blinked on again, showing him from above. The live CCTV feed now displayed his every movement, except, in the footage, the woman was already right behind him. Ji-hoon whipped around. The hallway was empty. He turned back toward the screens. The figure on the footage was no longer just behind him. It was overlapping him, standing inside his shadow. The vending machines buzzed violently, static flooding their displays. Then a hand, pale, wet, trembling, pressed against the glass from the inside of one of the screens. Another hand followed. The glass began to bulge outward, as though something was trying to crawl through. Ji-hoon bolted for the elevator, hammering the call button. The light above it finally turned red. The doors slid open, but what he saw inside made his knees give out. The elevator wasn't empty. It was filled with murky, brown water up to the ceiling, and floating in that water were dozens of cleaning uniforms, masks, and mops drifting slowly, like drowned bodies suspended midair. The humming started again, now right behind his ear, gentle and broken, repeating that familiar subway chime. He turned slowly, knowing what he would see. The woman was standing inches from him, mask-soaked, hair dripping black water onto the floor. Her hand reached toward the elevator doors. And as they began to close, Ji-hoon finally understood the warning. He tried to stop them, but it was too late. The last thing he saw before the doors sealed shut was his own reflection, watching him from inside the water, smiling. The elevator doors trembled, but didn't reopen. The red light above the panel blinked rapidly, bathing Ji-hoon in pulses of color that made the hallway look alive. His reflection was gone now, only the dull metallic surface remained. The humming had stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, expectant. He stood there, frozen, staring at his own blurred shape in the metal. Then, from somewhere above, the old intercom crackled to life. A low hum filled the corridor, followed by a strained voice. B4 access is restricted, it said. All maintenance after last train must be cleared with the control room. Ji-hoon's pulse quickened. The voice wasn't speaking to him. It sounded like a pre-recorded announcement, repeating on a loop. But underneath it, faintly, he heard something else. Another voice layered beneath the static. Don't let them clean alone. He stepped back, staring up at the ceiling speaker. Who's there? No response. He turned toward the row of vending machines again, and for the first time, he noticed a detail he'd missed before. Beneath one of the cracked tiles near the wall, a metal sign poked through the grime. He crouched and wiped it with his sleeve. The letters were almost worn away, but he could still make out the faint imprint. Maintenance Staff Memorial. Line 2 Expansion. 1,999. Ji-hoon froze. Memorial. His gaze drifted back to the elevator. The water he'd seen inside, The uniforms, the masks. A chill ran down his spine. He looked closer at the wall next to the sign. Scratched faintly into the tiles, under layers of dust and rust, were dozens of names. Some had been crossed out. Others were marked with dates. The most recent one read, Ji-hoon, 1:14 a.m. Ji-hoon whispered the name aloud. Han Ji-hoon. His breath caught in his throat. The name was his. He stumbled backward, staring at the wall as if it could change what he'd seen. His heartbeat roared in his ears. Somewhere down the hallway, the elevator dinged softly, the sound gentle, almost polite. The doors slid open again, but there was no water inside this time, no reflections, just the faint smell of bleach and the soft glow of a single fluorescent light. Then, as Ji-hoon stepped closer, he noticed something carved into the inside panel, words scratched deep into the metal, just above the buttons. Never ride down after midnight. The lights flickered once, and for a moment, the scratched words seemed to glow faintly like they had been left there by someone desperate to warn the next person who found their way down here. He realized now the woman wasn't just a ghost. She was a remnant of the ones who stayed, behind, cleaning the tunnels long after the city stopped remembering them, and now he was standing exactly where they had vanished. The elevator doors stood open, waiting. Inside, the light flickered steadily now, casting long shadows across the floor. Ji-hoon stared at the warning carved into the panel one last time. Never ride down after midnight. His hand trembled as he reached toward the button for one, but before he pressed it, the panel glitched. Every button on the board blinked red, cycling through floors that didn't exist, B5, B6, B7, until the screen went dark. A sound echoed from the corridor. The soft squeak of rubber shoes, the gentle drag of a mop. Ji-hoon turned. The woman was there again, halfway down the hall, humming that broken melody. The mask still covered her face, but this time her other hand was raised, waving slowly, almost kindly. He took a shaky step backward into the elevator. The doors began to close, though he hadn't touched anything. Panic surged through him. He tried to pry them open, but they kept sliding shut. Through the narrowing gap, he saw the woman lower her arm and tilt her head. Then came her voice, faint but clear. "You missed the last train." The doors sealed shut with a metallic thud. The elevator began to move, not up, not down, but deeper. The indicator flickered erratically, numbers spinning faster and faster until only static remained. By morning, security found the elevator stuck between levels. The footage showed Ji-hoon entering at 12:53 a.m. No one ever saw him leave. But sometimes, after midnight, the elevator still moves, even when no one calls it. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you liked them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.